We talk so much about police recruitment and retention in this country. As we constantly talk about, 9 out of every 10 police departments is short staffed. So I talk about this a lot in the media, but I wanted to bring in an expert in police recruitment. And he's also, well, first of all, I used to be a cop. So we're going to talk about that because, I love my fellow cops. But I wanted to bring someone who lives this every single day, how we can bring more people to this profession. He's the CEO of his own company. He's got a best-selling book. Colin Whittington, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me on. It's an honor to be here, and I really appreciate your time. I'm excited to talk about this important topic.
And it really is important. So before we start talking about what you're doing now, you spent 8 really busy years in Virginia law enforcement. So I got to ask you, why'd you become a cop?
I knew from a young age that I didn't want to have a job where I was just going to be bored, sitting behind a desk, doing the same thing day after day. I wanted something where it was going to be exciting, bring me fulfillment in my life, and also every day would be a little different. And I absolutely found that in law enforcement. It was just an unbelievable career, and I'm so thankful for my 8 years in law enforcement.
It's so true. And I always tell young people that I'm like, I never had the same day twice in 29 years. How many people can say that about their own career, their own profession?
Right.
But you got out after 8 years. Talk about that trajectory into being a best-selling author and a CEO.
Yeah, it's been an incredible journey. So I really love my 8 years in law enforcement. I was on patrol, I was in community policing, I was a PIO for a while, got promoted to sergeant, was named the deputy of the year for the whole state of Virginia in 2019, which was amazing. But then I started realizing after about 7.5 years that I knew my time in law enforcement was coming to a close. And it's definitely something we're seeing quite a bit in the current era, young officers leaving law enforcement after only a handful of years. And I just knew for me, it was time to make a change. So I ended up going into the recruiting industry, in the tech industry as a recruiter, and really didn't love it. I really didn't have the same passion for my work. I'm relatively active on LinkedIn, so if anyone is on LinkedIn, please find me. So once I had made the transition, I started getting messages from law enforcement officers, deputies, officers, and veterans as well, asking me for help, asking me, I see, Colin, I see that you made a transition to the private sector. Can you please help me out and see what you can do to help us? So I started my business. It's called Recruiting Heroes LLC. And I started it as a complete side hustle. It was supposed to be something I did a few hours a week just to help a few officers. But within about 3 months of me starting my business, it got so busy that I had to leave my full-time job because I was working like 20-hour days between my full-time job and my business. And the business kept getting busier and busier and busier, which was incredible at the time for me. And it's still doing incredibly well. And I knew I wanted to keep advancing how many officers I could help. Obviously, when I have one-on-one conversations, it's a one-on-one focus. I can only help one officer at a time. That got me thinking about writing my first book, and it's been an amazing journey. The book is called Beyond the Thin Blue Line, Career Strategies for Law Enforcement Officers. And it's all about a little bit about my story about leaving law enforcement and the mistakes and successes I had, and also gives a real guide and a strategies to officers who are contemplating leaving law enforcement. It talks about resume writing, how to network properly, how to interview for a private sector job, and just finding your passions and identifying careers in the private sector that can really bring you fulfillment. Since we come from law enforcement, we identify so much of who we are with being a cop that sometimes officers lose that sense of purpose when they leave. So part of the book is about that as well, trying to find your next purpose in life.
And that's the thing. And I want to talk a lot about that, helping police officers transition out of the job.
Right.
But first, since you are a recruiter, what do you think we're going to need to do in this profession to bring young people to this job? And I know you talk to law enforcement leadership quite a bit. What are we doing in this profession? And what do you think we need to do?
Yeah, I think law enforcement, unfortunately, we're sometimes slow to change. We kind of get stuck in our ways and are very slow to change. Things take a lot to make anything kind of movement happen. So I still see a lot of agencies, doing the things that were successful, 20, 30 years ago for recruiting in law enforcement. Even so much as putting job advertisements in newspapers, and if you're trying to recruit the younger generation, the millennials, the Gen Zers, I don't think a single one of them even reads the newspaper definitely not a hard paper, but not even online, they don't read those anymore. So I'm really part of my business now. I've added this recently is trying to help law enforcement agencies with their recruiting. So I realize it's a real need. So I've talked to agencies about, create a LinkedIn profile. LinkedIn has 700 million users, a lot of them here in the United States. And I made a profile for my agency in Loudoun County, Virginia. Ended up being we were getting 40% of our applicants through that platform. Another thing to try, obviously, TikTok, X, Facebook, Instagram, and then really having to show why this job is important to them and what they can really do in their careers. The younger generation isn't as driven by the financials. So I see agencies trying to throw out these massive signing bonuses, and they may work to an extent. But I think the younger generation really wants to see how they can be a part of a organization where they can make changes and help drive the organization forward and really be an integral part, not just a one of many. They want to feel like they're a part of something special. So I think the way you articulate your message is going to be super important for agencies.
I think that's so important because, you said it, I've said it. This is really such a calling, and you kind of hardly anybody falls into law enforcement. You really
Right.
seek it out and all that. But you're so right about what we're doing now to reach these younger generations. I literally read an ad in the newspaper about being a police officer when I went to test for this was a mid-sized agency. I was there with 1,000 other people. Now
Right.
we're seeing agencies that are putting out, these, online ads and things like that, and they get 3 or 4 people to show up. So I really like your idea of using social media, of using technology. And also, we need our leadership, don't we, to really talk about how great this job is.
Yeah, you really do. Again, I see so many ads that are just numbers focused. You'll make $90,000 a year, and that's again, obviously that matters to an extent, but really show what you can do, show that you can make a difference in the world. I really think the younger generation right now are dreamers. They want to feel like they can really make a huge difference in the world. So really focus on that and be unique with your recruiting initiatives as well. My last 3 years in law enforcement, I oversaw my agency's recruiting and hiring initiatives, and it was a blast, and we had so much fun with it. We actually flew like a 50-foot long banner over the beaches of Delaware and Virginia Beach, advertising our openings, and it actually got local media attention, and we got so many calls about it, and young people reaching out to us and asking questions, and it was a huge recruiting tool. So be creative with your recruiting. Don't just do the same old, same old. The agencies that are coming up with the brand new ideas, they're the ones who are getting the most interest and drawing people to their website and drawing people to actually apply as well.
That is such great advice. Um, so let's talk about people who have, spent time in law enforcement, maybe 10, 15, even 20 years. Right now, one of the things we are seeing is people are leaving the profession before they can retire because,
Right.
let's be frank, we're in an atmosphere where law enforcement very much, it's changing, but law enforcement is very often vilified and demonized. And a lot of people are saying, you know what, I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to do a job where, I might get, indicted simply for doing what I'm supposed to do. And we also see, and I want you to kind of explain this a little bit. People retire pretty young in law enforcement. I was 50 when I retired with 29 years. And a lot of my friends who weren't in law enforcement said, gee, I wish I could retire at 50. But I went on to do something else. Talk a little bit about that whole dynamic and what you do to help those officers.
Yeah, absolutely. So I speak with police officers and deputy sheriffs, federal agents, and veterans every single day that are either, reaching retirement, or some, like you mentioned, a lot of them are young folks who've done 10 years and have decided, even though I'm halfway through my career, I'm just done. I knew I hit my end point. They want to leave, and what my company does is trying to make sure we never talk anybody into leaving law enforcement. I always say, if someone hears me talk or reads my book and decides to stay in law enforcement, that's phenomenal. That's what I would love. That I would love for the best officers to stay in law enforcement. But I also fully believe that the ones who want to leave should be given the chance to leave as well. And so many of us in law enforcement, like you mentioned, get in really young, 18 years of age, 21 years of age, depending on your state and the requirements of your state. So that means if you did 20 years or 25 years, you could be in your young 40s and looking for another career. And most people, either financially or just because they can't sit still, need a second career. And what I found is, sadly, there's two things I usually hear from officers. One is, I have no idea what I can do in the private sector. I'm not a good fit for anything, which is totally wrong. And then the second thing is, well, I don't really want to be in security or investigative type of roles anymore, but that's all I'm a fit for. And that's absolutely not supposed to be a knock at that industry, because there are officers who love that kind of work can do phenomenally well in the private sector. But at the same time, I want people to know that your skill set transfers so phenomenally well to a whole host of industries. You don't have to just be in security or investigations. You can get into recruiting like I am. You can go to manufacturing. You can go to the IT industry. But the thing is, it takes careful planning to be able to make yourself a competitive candidate. So I always tell my candidates, ideally, you would start thinking about your next career 3 to 5 years before you actually plan to leave law enforcement. And I teach strategies where I have candidates actually write out the things about law enforcement that they love. If you're a field training officer in FTO, maybe you really love the training aspect. Maybe you're in charge of accreditation in your agency and you love that, or the human resource side. Start writing out what you really had passions about. And then what's cool with websites like LinkedIn, you don't have to just, when you're searching for jobs, you don't have to just type in job titles. You can type in skills. So you can type in a skill that you're really passionate about, and then it'll show up a ton of jobs that have that skill that they're looking for. And you can start looking through those job boards and job postings and seeing, what are these companies looking for? If they're looking for a degree or certain certifications or certain training, knowing that ahead of time gives you a great place to start, and you can actually start a career plan for yourself. So if you have to get, a certain certification to be a really good candidate, if you still have 3 years to go, you're golden. You can start working towards it. But it's the candidates who come to me saying, "Hey, Colin, I'm retiring next month. I would love to go in the IT industry, but I have no IT background." And that's kind of where I'm like, well, if you're okay taking a really basic salary, really low salary, and a really basic job, that might work for you. But if you're hoping to make, a salary that's going to sustain your lifestyle and be a higher rank, you need to come to those applications with, the skills and the certifications and the training to make yourself competitive. And that's where I think we in law enforcement, we struggle. We dive headfirst into law enforcement, which is amazing, but we completely forget to start planning about what's after law enforcement as well.
That's a good point. Most of us, I know when, we all start on the job, I certainly didn't think anything beyond a law enforcement career. What do we all kind of think about? I'd like to get out someday in one piece. And I've got that pension, right? We all think about that pension, which a lot are now finding out that that's not the end all be all either.
Right.
And you made a very good point. Somebody who's been a law enforcement officer, they have a hard time sitting still, not doing anything. We get into this job and we're on that mission. My husband had a very, very good friend who got out of law enforcement, went into some other stuff, and then finally called him one day and said, "Hey, I'm retiring." And Dave asked him, "What's your next mission?" And he said, "I'm going to move to where my grandkids live, and I'm going to be the best damn grandpa there ever was." And we went to his funeral, and his grandkids, every single one of them, got up and talked about that his whole mission was being their grandpa, and it was the best. It was and he's told us it was the best job he ever had. So you don't even have to have an actual paid job, right? But you do really need that mission. How can law enforcement leadership help with this? Because I think that if you work for an agency or you work for a law enforcement leader who says, "Hey, you know what, I care about you now as you're working for me, and but I also care about your life after law enforcement." What do you talk to leadership about?
Yeah, always an interesting conversation I have when I talk to chiefs or sheriffs or any command staff members. Because one of the things I do, I offer a half-day class where I can actually go to agencies and teach the skills that I mentioned in the book and that we're talking about here. And I usually get two type of responses. One of them, the one I like, is, "Can you be here tomorrow?" kind of response. The other one is, I've actually heard this almost verbatim saying, "We do not want you teaching our officers how to leave." And again, I was in the recruiting world myself, in the recruiting and law enforcement world. I totally understand the issues around recruitment and retention. But we talk so much nowadays about taking care of our officers, taking care of our troops. That has to extend beyond their time in our agencies. You know, if you're only caring about them when they're wearing your uniform, are you truly caring about them, or are you simply worrying about the number that they're filling and their seat that they're filling? Whereas if you're thinking about them long term, you want them to be successful in their entire life, not just in the 10, 15, 20 years they're with your agency. And I always say one of the greatest gifts you can give your officers in the last final act of support is helping them with their transition to the private sector. So making sure that you incentivize further education, making sure that you either give them the time off for it or give them maybe some financial support to get further education. And then bringing speakers like myself in. I would love to come speak to every agency in America and talk about what we're talking about here today, because it's such an important topic. Probably 9 out of 10 cops, if not more, will need a second career after law enforcement. And we're just right now as a profession failing our officers and helping them prepare. You look at the military, they themselves have their own recruiting and retention problems, but even they have their transition assistance program, TAPS. So they help their personnel transition to the private sector. We're not doing that at all in law enforcement. Agencies might have, financial classes about pensions and stuff, but no one's talking about how officers can actually find careers after law enforcement. So that's where I would love to come to agencies and also be there to actually discuss this. And again, I'm not trying to convince anyone to leave. I'm just trying to give people the tools to start thinking about the next step, whether it be next month or whether it be 10 years from now. It's better to start early. You can never start too soon, because retirement comes up quick. You think you've got all the time in the world, and all of a sudden it's there tomorrow. And then my final tip, because I guys have to vouch for my book, of course, as well. I always joke with chiefs when I talk to them now is, it's always customary that chiefs or sheriffs give their retiring officers some kind of plaque, right? And it's a really nice gesture. But these plaques, I know I have plaques still. They're all in my closet. They're very sweet at the time. They don't do a whole lot. So in addition to the plaque, still give them the plaque because it's great. Give them this book. I
Hold
do
that
bulk
book
order
up
discounts.
again.
Right. So give them this book. This book will literally tell your officers exactly what to do to be very successful in the private sector. I do bulk order discounts. I make it as cheap as possible. That way you all can give it to your officers for very, very cheap. It's a minimal financial burden for your agency. But again, it's going to show that you care about your officers, again, beyond their time in your agency. And I love the author, Simon Sinek. He talks about the infinite game. And he talks about companies and organizations should be thinking the infinite game, which means thinking forever, not just thinking about the next quarter, the next board meeting. I think the same thing, that same principle should apply to law enforcement. Think what this impact will have on the long term for not just your agency, but the whole profession. If we start really caring about our people, both in law enforcement and afterwards as well. Yeah, I know the recruitment and retention is tough right now, but it'll get better again. We'll get through this difficult period. And you start showing that you really care about your officers, how much will that draw new people in? The younger generation that want to feel valued, and they start seeing, oh, law enforcement really cares about their people. Not only are they giving them the tools to be great cops, but they're also preparing them to be great citizens and great employees in the private sector when they're done. That's somewhere where I want to work. And I think when you think in that long, forever mindset, that's when you can really make the best decisions for your people and not just think about like, oh man, our vacancy number went up a little bit last quarter. Obviously, that's still an important topic, and I can help with that as well, of course. But think about the long term. Think about your officers, and don't just write them off the second they hit their retirement date, because life after law enforcement is tough. I left after only 7.5, 8 years, and even I had a difficult time with that. I can't imagine what it must be like for someone who's done 2 or 3 decades. So give them the tools they need to be successful in the next stage of their life.
Last week I talked to and I do this frequently, I talked to a law enforcement mental wellness expert. And one of the things that she talked about was so many officers don't see that light at the end of the tunnel after law enforcement. And I think that what you're describing really should be added to any officer wellness program, because officers who get so bogged down in negativity and this is going to be my whole life forever, just seeing all this horrible stuff, the trauma, all of that, if they can take control of their lives enough to prepare a life after law enforcement, I think that would go a long way to positively impacting their mental health, don't you think?
Oh, absolutely. I think anytime you have a goal in life, whether it be a short-term goal or a long-term goal, it gives you something to work towards. And it gives you something to really be excited about and come to wake up every day and be motivated for. And knowing that you're not in your current difficult spot forever.
Colin, give me a 1-minute pitch on why employers should hire former or retired law enforcement officers.
Absolutely. There's no better person to hire than a former officer. Our police officers, deputy sheriffs, federal agents, we have to deal with stressful situations every single day. Every day, every call, we're going to something completely unknown, having to make split-second decisions that are, between life and death oftentimes. And these people come into your companies, they're going to be extremely loyal. No one's more hardworking than a police officer and a teacher. My wife's a teacher, so I have to throw that out there as well. But no one's harder working than those two professions, and we can overcome obstacles. Even if we don't know the answer right away, we know how to find it. We're really quick on our feet. We're analytical. We are passionate about what we do. And the great thing as well, I see that law enforcement officers, as well as military veterans, they stay with companies far longer than their civilian counterparts because we're used to being loyal to our organization. And that'll be the same thing in the private sector. Turnover is a massive ordeal in the private sector as well. So if you want to have an employee that's going to be with you for the long term, hire a police officer and you won't be disappointed.
Absolutely. Where can people find you, contact you, find the book?
Absolutely. So I'm on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, and X as well. LinkedIn is where I'm most active. My websites, I have two of them. My author website is whittingtonbooks.com. And on there, you can read about my book. You can schedule me to come speak to your agency or speak at your conference or what have you. I'll travel all over the world. I'm going to Ireland in September to speak at a police week kind of event. I'm very excited for that. And then my business is recruitingheroesllc.com. Both that's also on LinkedIn and Facebook as well. And that's great for both companies and agencies that want to hire and recruit, as well as for you heroes out there that need help with resumes, LinkedIn, interview training. It's all on there. And anyone who buys my book, it's 50% off my services as well. So keep that in mind too.
That's outstanding. Colin, we cannot thank you enough for spending time with us today. And if you would like more information about the National Police Association, visit us at nationalpolice.org.
Are you passionate about supporting law enforcement? The National Police Association is on a mission to strengthen our communities, protect our families, and ensure justice prevails. But they need your help. Every dollar you donate makes a difference. It funds the legal defense of police officers and police agencies, supports advocacy for pro-law enforcement legislation, and funds community outreach programs and education. Imagine safer streets, stronger bonds between officers and neighborhoods, and a brighter future for all. Join us. Visit our website at nationalpolice.org to donate today.